Hello, I apologize. I am a couple minutes late. I am still waiting for this Instagram to connect and go live. There we go. If you're coming to me from Instagram, here it goes. Boom. All right. Welcome, everybody, back to the live session. I'm so excited to be here with you today. There it is. Okay. It looks like I'm going on Instagram. It looks like I'm going on the Facebook, and I apologize for being a few minutes late, but I'm here and super excited to talk to you and return to this series. All right. So let's get started here. We'll start here and see how that goes. All right. Super excited. Okay. So the next two values focus on an often missing component when we think about early childhood education and care. The children are there, right? And so are you, the teacher, the caregiver. But what about the family? Where is the family when we think about the work of fostering healthy whole child development? What if I told you the family was just as important as the child and the teacher? Would you agree? Of course, most of us understand the important role families play in supporting children's development, but often we forget about how our relationship with families also impacts their development. Imagine a family that doesn't feel comfortable at the place where they bring their young child to be cared for every day. Maybe it reminds them of school, and for them, those memories are not good ones. So when they show up to drop off and pick up, they're guarded or reserved, right? They might be standoffish. How might those feelings impact their child's development? And what can and should you, as an early childhood educator, do to improve this relationship? Tonight's live discussion is a reminder that not only do we need to respect children's families, but we also need to develop meaningful and caring relationships with the families to support the child's healthy development. Welcome back. I'm Dr. Denisha Jones, scholar activist, former teacher educator, true play advocate, and creator of a community called Free to Teach Equals Liberated to Learn. We are in week 8 of Embracing Early Childhood Education and Care Values as Resistance, our Wednesday night live series where we dig into the early childhood education and care values that should be guiding our work with young children and use a 4-step framework to turn their values into active resistance. I took a 4-week break while traveling, but we are returning to finish the last 4 values for the next 4 weeks. So here's the revised schedule that you can take a look at. So we're back today, and like I said, we're just going to do the next few back to back. And I do have some special guests to announce, which I will do later today. All right. So if you're joining us for the first time, this series is rooted in a special issue of the Global Education Review that I co-edited called Navigating an Uncertain Future by Embracing Early Childhood Education and Care Values. Co-edited with Helge Wasmuth. If you want to scan the blue QR code, you can access that first issue. And very exciting, I just got word from Helge that the second issue will be out tomorrow. So I'll definitely be sharing that and adding a link to access the second issue in next week's live discussion as well. So each week, we talk about one of these values, these 10 values that I listed in the call for papers. We unpack it and we walk through the 4-step framework together, name it, audit it, frame it, and advocate for it. If you missed the last live discussion or any of the live discussions, the last one was on affirming and celebrating diversity is a vital asset in the lives of young children. Just scan the red QR code and you'll go to the YouTube page where you will find all of the recordings. And then I'll also I've been sharing a link to the webpage that I created that has all the images that I do for each of the values and all of the recordings as well too. All right. Take that away. So again, tonight's value, and it's going to pop up on your screen here in a second, is about it's about families, right? We talked about that briefly. Here we go. So the value is supporting children's development through caring meaningful relationships with families and caregivers. And it's kind of related, right? So as I mentioned earlier, it's connected to next week's value as well too. it's closely related, right? The next value is strengthening collaboration and communication between families, caregivers, and educators. So first, we're going to talk about how the relationships we foster with families support children's natural development. And then next week, we're going to discuss how to improve our collaboration and communication with families and ourselves as their educators. And we're going to examine each of these values within my framework for embracing them as a form of resistance or an act of resistance. So why does the relationship you have with the children's families impact their development? Well, if you remember from your course on theories of child development, Grafenbrenner's ecological system theory reminds us that the developing child is impacted by many different factors, right? And so this was a system of nested structures was the bio, if you remember, right? Grafenbrenner's ecological systems nested structure. So the first nested structure is the microsystem, and it comprises the family, the school, and the community. Now, some people also include media, right? And I think the changes in media, it might show up, right, into the microsystem. But the microsystem are the things that have a direct impact on the developing child. So the developing child is in the middle, and then the systems, right, are around them. And so the microsystem is the first one. And it's really important because it contains the family, the school, and the community, right? So each of these has a direct impact, as I mentioned, on the developing child. The family, of course, is the child's first source of love, attachment, and socialization. And then the school and the community provide their own socialization as the child grows and spends more time away from the family. The second layer, the mesosystem, is the interaction between one or two microsystems. So that really ties into what we're talking about today, right? Because I'm trying to get you to think about how valuing the relationship you build with the children's families is going to support the child's development, because that is an interaction within the mesosystem, right? So think about it, how the family interacts with the school impacts the child's development, and how the school interacts with the community impacts the child development. Now, I'm saying school, but this could include a child development center, a family child care home, right? Any educational environment that you're working in is included when we talk about this, right? So you might say, well, my kid's not in school yet, or I don't teach school-age children. No, no, no. If you're caring for 3 and 4-year-olds in your backyard, in your basement, in a church basement, in a university setting, or in a public school, right? That's what I'm talking about, is that setting, right? It's the school. So think about family school partnerships and how those provide additional opportunities for children to grow and develop, right? So there might be events, opportunities for children to come together, be with the school, be with the child, be with their families, right, in these different spaces. And those are the things that we really remember from childhood, right? Those opportunities that we had to bring our two worlds together, our family world and our school world together, right? And then community programs often provide support to schools, so they also have a direct impact on the developing child, right? So we know, like, we search for parents, adults, and everyone search for homes in good communities with good schools. Why? Because we know it matters. We know that sending our child to a school that it's in a community that's safe and well cared for, is usually going to be in a school that is also well cared for, and that child is going to be well cared for, right? So they all play an impact together, and they impact that. And if you truly believe that it takes a village to raise a child, then you understand why the relationship you have with the families matter, right? But the reality is that teaching in early childhood education today barely leaves room to develop relationships with families. And schools often treat families as a limited partner, creating a system where parents contribute based on the school's needs that is often less reciprocal than what the family might need. And this is what we need to resist. The system that tells us families aren't important or places too many obstacles in our way so that we don't have the time and energy to build those relationships. Instead, we must embrace this value of supporting children's development by building meaningful, caring relationships with families, and work to name and resist those roadblocks. All right, so I want to pause here and give you a chance to reflect. I can check the comments if you're following on Facebook or Instagram, so just go ahead and add them there. I'm going to have two questions, reflection questions, pop up on your screen. So the first one is, what is one way that you build caring, meaningful relationships with families, right? So think about the things that you do in your program every day, and it could be as simple as just, sending notes home to families, right? Greeting them. I love the story of one of my favorite child care providers, Melinda Marshall. And she told the story on her Facebook page about her family child care home provider. She's a family child care home provider, and I follow her online, and she told the story of a parent coming in during drop off and kind of like was sitting down on a bench nearby and just kind of fell asleep. And she just put a blanket on her and let her sleep. And she woke up and was like, wow, I must have been so tired, right? That is the kind of way you build meaningful relationships with families. I just love that story for so many reasons, right? One, the parent felt comfortable falling asleep there, right? And just or needed a break. And two, she just let it happen, right? Like, yeah, of course, why not, right? Hopefully that won't cause any issues with licensure later. I mean, they don't know about it, right? So it's a good thing that we can do to build that relationship, right? So that's the first question. And then the second question is, what gets in the way of you building caring, meaningful relationships with families, right? So what gets in the way? We know there are lots of things. I just mentioned childcare regulations, right? Belinda shares a lot of her experiences, as do other family childcare providers, about how these regulations, and I get that they're supposed to be in the best interest of the child, but often they're imposed by people who don't understand what childcare really is, right? And so how can a regulation may get in the way of you building that relationship with family, right? Like you can't talk, you can't have time. Maybe there's a regulation that you can't have an adult in the building for too long, right? In your space for too long. I hope that's not one, right? That's an extreme example. But there are policies and practices that get in the way of building caring, meaningful relationships with families. Some would argue that the policy of being a mandated reporter gets in the way, because you are then looking at the parent as a source of pain and harm and neglect, and maybe you're not building that relationship with them if you're forced to look at them in that lens, right? And I know that's not what I know that's not how it was designed, right? The mandated reporter system, but that's what it's becoming, right? It's becoming a tool to police families that teachers are forced to, even when they don't want to sometimes, report things, right? But they legally have to. And there are people challenging. I know in New York City, there are people challenging mandated reporter laws because of these, they get in the way of building healthy relationships because they take a really black and white view of something that's very gray, right? And they don't give teachers a lot of agency to decide for themselves what they want to report and what they don't. So that's, again, just one example. So those are the two questions. Go ahead and put them in the chat. I'll check the comments. Okay. Don't see anything in the comments, but go ahead and put them in the chat. If you're watching the recording of this later, you can put them on the YouTube comments and I will be sure to respond, right? So as you respond to those two questions, I want to once again take a moment to remind you that this is not about blame. If you're able to cultivate the relationships, if you're unable to cultivate the relationship with families that you want, it's not necessarily your fault. The system doesn't want us to build these relationships. The system wants us to see education as a business. Parents and children are as the consumers, and you as the laborer. Relationships that center children's development and strong bonds between families and teachers disrupts education as a business approach. And I believe that it's all being done on purpose. But that doesn't mean you just throw your hands up in the air and concede defeat. Quite the opposite. I want you to recognize how important this value is and pledge to embrace it in many different ways, and then use that as a way for you to resist. All right, so I'm going to give you a minute to think about that while I get my next image ready right here. There we go, and it is that one. Okay. All right. So I'm going to put the framework on the stage for you right now. There it is. So this is the framework. So now let's apply the 4-part framework to this value. So the first step is to name your value. How does supporting children's development through meaningful and caring relationships with families support your belief in high quality early childhood education? I think for many early childhood educators, we receive a natural high when we know our families trust us. Trust is built through relationships, and it needs to be reciprocal. We must trust them so that they can trust us. To give children the best early years experience, we must develop a circle of trust between the child, their families, and themselves. Through that trust, the child is able to feel safe and cared for and allows whole child development to flourish. So I've just been talking a lot about trust, right? So in my community, Free to Teach equals Liberated to Learn, I do monthly guided reflective prompts, and this one's on trusting teachers and young children. And then I also do mini reflective courses for people who want to go deeper. And this course, this month's course, is a part of a 3-part series called Repairing Early Childhood Education and Care. And the first one is Begin with Trust, right? And so I outline 4 pillars of trust, right? So if you want to know more, just go ahead and scan the green QR code at the top of your screen. You can join the community. If you join now, I'll give you 7 days free to preview the course. Other than that, it's just $10, but the community is free. I also have videos to discussing the prompts as well too, to talk about trust and why it's so important. But it also shows up here, right? Because trust is how we build those relationships, right? So when I name this value, I talk about trust being important and needing the time and space to build relationships with children's families, because it's going to support children's natural development. All right, so step 2 then is to conduct an alignment audit. What policies prohibit you from enacting this value? What behaviors show you're out of alignment? What is an early warning sign that you are drifting? So I think not having enough time to get to know children and as individuals and their families, feeling overwhelmed with curriculum and policies, and not engaging in conversations with families that are not just about, teacher parent teacher conferences, right? If the only time you meet with a child's family is at the beginning of the year and then 2 or 3 times throughout and at the end of the year, that's not the high quality relationship, right? It's what happens and what most of us have as relationships, but it could be more, right? But there's a lot of things, there's a lot of pressure on teachers, right? So maybe you don't feel like you have the time to meet with families. There's a lack of trust in families, so you don't think it's worth your time to meet with families. Families might not be trusting us, right? Even though they're sending their kids to us. Maybe sometimes it's not by choice, right? If you're teaching pre-K4 in a public school, right? I mean, it is optional, but most parents need childcare. They need education. They need somewhere for the kids to go so they can go to work, right? So there's lots of things happening. And so it's important to audit those things. What gets in the way of your ability to build these positive relationships with families? Third, frame the message. Why does this value matter? So this is your elevator speech. Here's mine. Relationships are key to ensuring optimal whole child development. Teachers need time to cultivate strong, healthy relationships with their students and their families. Curriculum mandates often impede teachers' ability to spend time developing their relationship. Children with social and emotional needs are often seen as problematic, as teachers don't have the time to strengthen the relationship with them. We must ensure that building solid relationships with our children and their families is at the center of the work we do. So that's it. A short speech that you can give to anyone in a grocery store. Well, actually, I think having relationships with my kids' parents, is so important to their development. Why does that matter, right? You're just providing a service that parents are paying for. Why does it matter if you have a healthy relationship? Then you can talk to them about all the things, right? You don't have to mention Brofenbrenner, but think about a child who is in an environment where the parent doesn't have a healthy relationship with the school and the school doesn't have a healthy relationship with the family. How does that impact the child, right? And think about all the ways that it can support children when they're getting the same love and support and attachment at home that they're getting at school, and they feel like their teachers and their parents are on the same page, right? That's what we really want. And so I remember when I was a preschool director in California, in San Diego, one of the things I heard from my teachers that were like, they used to do home visits, and that was so important to their ability to build relationships, and then they weren't allowed. And it was because of issues regarding concerns about safety. Now I get it. I'm a law degree. I'm developing a legal practice. I know that the law is all about preventing, right, bad things from happening and then rectifying them when they do. But we can't stop doing the things that matter. Going out into families' homes, it's so crucial for building that relationship, especially when it's the first time the child is leaving home and going into an institutionalized space of care, right? They need that time. They need to come and you need to visit and be a part so that the child can feel good, but also the parents, right? But home visits take time. They take, you need a lot of time to get them done. Teachers need to be paid. And then it came down to concerns about what happens if a teacher trips going up a parent's steps to get to the door. I mean, we can spend our whole lives in the what ifs, right? But then we're taking away from the right now. Right now, children need teachers who are building relationships with families, and home visits is a great way to do that, right? So by naming the value, auditing it, what gets in the way, stopping home visits, right? And then talking about why that's important, right? Framing it, we've done 3 steps of the framework. And the final one is to advocate for your value. How can you advocate for this value in your personal and professional life? I advocate for this value by working with teachers to assess their relationships with their students. And I share relationships building activities and how teachers can make time for all students to feel connected and for families, right? So this was a big one. My students were like, you make us do so much. We don't just do a parent newsletter. Like, no, I had them do mock parent teacher conferences. They had to do all sorts of things with the engage with parents, because when I started teaching kindergarten in Washington, D.C. in 2003, I felt unprepared to deal with parents. One, I was young. I was in my 20s. I didn't have children. I didn't feel like I had I didn't know how to connect with parents, and I didn't feel well prepared. So all of my teaching as a teacher educator for the next 25 years was all about preparing my students for the ways where I wasn't prepared, and dealing with families was one of them. And so I used to do a lot of activities to have them engage with families and be prepared and to get over that hump, right? So that's how I advocate for this value when I was an early childhood teacher educator. And now I constantly just remind the educators that I'm privileged to work with how important it is to foster their relationships with families. So tonight's value, supporting children's development through caring, meaningful relationships with families and caregivers. By embracing this value, you identify the barriers and work to remove them so you can support all children's healthy development through the relationships you build with them and their families. If this discussion sparked interest in you, I invite you to join my community, Free to Teach equals Liberated to Learn. The QR code is up on the screen and you can scan that. You can join for free. I don't have a sneak peek of next week's value ready to share today, but I am excited to announce that I will have a special guest. Keitha Marks will join me to talk about how we strengthen collaboration and communication between families, caregivers, and educators. Keitha is an amazing early childhood educator and caregiver. She's a family child care home provider in Illinois, and I'm super excited to have her on for this conversation. So you can join us next week at 7 p.m. for that. All right. So thank you for all that you do to protect childhood and to care for children. See you next week.